Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Akram and you're watching Knowledge 360. In the previous video, we have seen about constraints in PostgreSQL database and we had covered the topic of check constraint. In this video, we'll see about not null constraint, what are not null constraint and how we can declare it and the examples of not null constraint. So the not null constraint is to ensure that no column value should contain the null value. The functionality of not null constraint is similar to check constraint. In check constraint, we use to compare the value of a column that it should contain positive number only in case of prices of products, or it can be compared with other column values. For example, the discounted price can always be lesser than the actual price and so on. So in this not null constraint, we check the value of a column that the value should be not null. It can be any value, but it cannot be blank value or the unknown value. So functionally wise, this is similar to check constraint, but there is a limitation of not null constraint that we cannot check the particular value, that what kind of value is going to store. It will allow any value, but it will not allow the null value. And in case of check constraint, we used to name a constraint, but in not null constraint, we cannot give any name to the constraint. And there is another difference. In check constraint, we used to have two types of check constraint. One is column constraint and second is table level constraint. But the not null constraint is always a column constraint. So it cannot be applied to the table level. So let's see some example of it. So first let's see one basic example of not null constraint where we ensure that product number and product name should not be null. So for that, what we are trying to do is we are declaring the column as not null. So this is enough to make a not null constraint declare. So if we create the table will be created, and with this table we cannot insert the null value, and you can see we have left the price value as it is. So price will allow to be null, but the name and the product number cannot be null. So let's see example. The first one is a valid example that will allow the data insert to the table because we have value for product number and the name as well. So let's try to insert it. The data is inserted. Now if we try to insert this record, the data insertion will be failed because we are providing name value as null, but we have declared name to be not null. So we need name value at any cost. So if we try to insert this record, this will be failed. So the record insertion is failed. And if you see one more thing here, that there is nowhere we have the constraint name because the not null constraint cannot be named. So we cannot give any name to not null constraint. Let's see another example of not null constraint, that we can add multiple constraint along with the not null constraint. For example, in this case, for our price column, we can put the check of that price can always be greater than 0. But what will happen if someone doesn't even provide the price entry during the insertion? So in that case, null value will be stored. So which is typically should not happen, and we should insert the price value when data is added. So to restrict that, what we need to do is we need to implement two constraint here. One is not null constraint and another is check constraint to make sure only positive number are inserted into the price column. So let's create the table first. The table is created. Now if I insert the first record, it will allow or not? Yes, it will allow because price column is 15, which is not null, means we are providing some value, and also it is a positive value. So let's try to insert it. The inserted successfully. Now if I try to insert this second record, what will happen? It will fail because the reason is price we are providing null value. So in this case we have declared the price column as not null, but we are trying to provide the price value as null. It will fail. So if I insert, it fails. And in the third example, this will also fail because the price value we are providing, but we are providing a negative value. So this will fail because of the check constraint we have given. The check constraint says price should always be greater than 0. So let's try this. Okay, so this is failed, and we see the product price check constraint is failed. That means the check constraint is failed. Again, there is another way to implement the not null constraint. The way is, first we create the table. We write the table create table script and put null by default for every column, and wherever we need the column to be not null, we just include the not keyword before that. suppose I want to make the product number not null, so I'll put the not keyword before this. So this is how we can also implement the not null constraint for a table. Now let's create the table. The table is created. Okay, so this way also we can create a not null constraint. There is a tip for you. In most database designs, the majority of columns should be marked as not null because we expect our table contain as many data as possible, maximum number of columns as not null. That means we are making the columns as mandatory for a record. So if the video was helpful, do like the video and subscribe the channel to get the notification for upcoming videos. In the next video, we'll see about unique constraints in PostgreSQL database. So let's meet in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye bye.